of the Sustainability Advisory Council meeting to order. Tonight, before we go ahead and call the roll, I just would like to welcome Maddie Garbaz. Is that how I say that? Yes? Okay. Who is going to be the youth member on the committee. And so we're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for volunteering and welcome. You can say a few words about yourself if you would like to, but you also don't have to if you don't want to. All right. Just say what school you go to, maybe what grade you're in, and why you're interested in the committee.
So I'm going to be a freshman at Urbana High School. I got interested in this simply because I just kind of felt that the youth aren't that represented, and my mom actually met Stacy at an event, and they started talking, and that's how I got to know Stacy. And I'm helping her organize the I don't know how to call it, the
Youth Sustainability Summit.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it later in the meeting as an announcement.
And she helps me apply to this position, and so here I am.
Well, great. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Okay. Also, Amanda, will you call the roll, please?
Stacy Gloss,
Here.
Dustin Allred,
Here.
Claire Johnson,
Here.
Todd Rusk, Andrew Stumpf,
Here.
Morgan White, Tesfaye Wolde Medine,
Yes, I'm here.
Scott Tess,
Here.
Maddie Garbaz.
Here.
We're all here.
Great. Thanks. We have a quorum this evening. Next, we will go ahead and do approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Will someone move to approve the minutes from the meeting that we held in June?
Move. I'll move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you. Were there any changes or are there any changes to the meeting minutes that anybody observed that need to be made? Or corrections, maybe not changes? Okay. Not hearing anybody. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any nays? Okay, that passes. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda for the meeting this evening? I would like to bring up just maybe a clarification. Under number 6 and 7, 7 says discussion of climate action plan, and 8 says a discussion of timeline for the next commission planning effort. I wasn't sure if those are falling under old business or new business. And do we want to just make that clarification since we usually follow a certain agenda format?
This is a new agenda format that is being made uniform across all the city commissions. And the format, as I've received it, doesn't have a category for new business. It just lists new business as their own numbered items. So if there were old business, it would be, letter A, letter B, such as staff report is letter A.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We appreciate it. All right. So we will move on then into public input, knowing that there are no additions or changes to the agenda this evening. A member of the public is welcome to address us if they would like to. Okay. Next would be the staff report. Scott?
Good evening. Before I get started, I also want to introduce someone. Amanda Flores is with us today. She's new to Public Works, and she's going to be providing support to this commission. So welcome, Amanda. First, update on Solar Urbana Champaign 3.0. We have passed our first benchmark of 50 kW of contracted capacity, triggering a 1% discount for all participants, past and future, in this round. And it says we're at 127 kW, but we're actually in the 130s now. I think there was another contract signed today. So still moving along well, and I hope to get to the next benchmark of 150 to activate another 1% discount soon. The next section I'm going to skip over because I think we're going to address that in an agenda item, but it was there for your reading before the meeting. In some additional activities, there is an organization called Illinois Climate Table. It's sort of a working group of lots of energy and climate and sustainability-oriented and interested organizations. They have a downstate caucus that gets together in, outside of Chicago, downstate Illinois, to focus on issues that are of interest to those communities. And they're working on a public engagement process called Listen, Lead, Share. They've already started this, and they're doing essentially listening sessions all over the state. And they're interested in doing one in Urbana or Urbana-Champaign in September or October. Faith in Place is actually hosting one, but organizers are interested in hosting a second in Urbana-Champaign. So I'm talking to them about what their interests are and where and when. And if anyone's interested in being connected to that group, please let me know. The next item, I'm going to hand back to Stacy. Do you want to talk about the project you're working on with Maddie?
Sure, thank you. So one of the projects that I am working on over the spring and this summer is sort of more like mentoring a group of rising high school students and high school students that are developing the first Champaign-Urbana Youth Sustainability Summit. It's going to take place on October 6th, and tentatively we have it set so that the summit will take place at the Siebel Center at the University of Illinois. The students who are working on putting the conference together have been working very hard on creating a poster and a website, and that will be able to go live pretty soon. It wasn't ready for tonight, but it may be ready tomorrow. The event is being sponsored by the City of Urbana and the Sustainability Advisory Commission, so we are all grateful for the support from the city for that. We also have included Champaign County Sustainability Network, who will help promote the event, and the youth organization I Matter will also be helping to sponsor, and we'll be figuring out in the next couple months what their role will be during the event. It will be a day-long summit for 8th graders to 12th graders, and the students came up with the agenda themselves. It's pretty ambitious, and they hope to learn about the global effects of climate change as well as what our local sustainability efforts are, and they would like to sort of work together to have the summit conclude with a possibly like a statement that hopefully students will present to the SAC and possibly the City Council about kind of what they want in their community and sort of what their vision of sustainability is for the future for us. We're also working on a sort of for a different day, a volunteer project, but that is to be determined at this time. And with that, I'll turn that back over to you, unless there are any questions. Okay.
Great. Moving on to water management plan. We are partnering again with the Midwest Pesticide Action Center on their Midwest Grows Green project. And we're doing a whole weekend of events in September. The dates are in the packet. But we're going to be tabling at the market at the square. There's going to be an organic gardening event at the Park District's Organic Garden. That's at Meadowbrook Park. And then we'll also be working with the Champaign County Master Gardeners on a natural lawn care demonstration on a Monday following that weekend. So a number of events, and we're promoting those through all the typical channels. And if you see a Facebook post, please like it or repost it. The next item, we were able to access the new Illinois EPA water quality testing. They do this report every 2 years. They do not sample all of the water bodies every 2 years, but they publish whatever the most recent determination is in terms of surface waters. And you'll see there's 4 surface waters in Urbana that get tested at one time or another. They all have designated uses. So things like fish consumption may or may not be a designated use that needs to be attained. One distinction here this year is they're no longer using the term and the concept secondary contact. So they're only looking at primary contact, which is in the water. Secondary contact was an idea that you would be near the water and maybe splashed or something. But they're no longer using the designated use of secondary contact. Next is the status of each designated use for each water body, and then the cause of any non-attaining status, and then the suspected source of that. So no difference here from previous years. Most of our designated uses are not assessed. As you can imagine, there are thousands of water bodies in Illinois that Illinois EPA is responsible for, so they can't test all of these, and they can't assess all of these designated uses. One of the most important ones is in our report is Crystal Lake, specifically fish consumption that is tested, like a water quality test, a chemistry test. It is not supporting fish consumption designation. It is impacted for mercury. The source is atmospheric deposition, so mercury in the air that comes down. And that's not surprising. There is a fish advisory for statewide in Illinois for mercury. So the advisory is to substantially limit fish consumption from fish caught in Illinois because of mercury. But there's no change here to report. I'm just providing the update.
Scott, I wonder, the atmospheric deposition sounds strange if it's impacting, one source but not the other sources. And so, I just wonder if there's any further explanation on that. Is there something about dilution or, the rate of turnover? Anyways, why is atmospheric deposition affecting, one over the other when they're essentially in the same location,
With respect to these 4 water bodies?
Mm-hmm.
It may be an issue of the other 4 not being assessed for fish consumption.
Oh, I see.
So they're all,
Okay.
the other 3 are all
Right.
not assessed. It may also be a matter of the other 3 are streams, so that water is moving. So maybe that in the lakes and ponds, the atmospheric deposition just keeps coming, and so builds up to some detectable level. I'm speculating, but those are both possible.
Any sense of, people fish in that, as we all know. And anyways, I just wonder if there's resources or technical assistance or anything available for some type of, remedial action, something to, bring the levels down. Do you have any awareness of resources or funding that could be available?
Well, the Park District is aware of the statewide fish advisory as well as this sampling.
Sure.
And they are, and some of you may know this, they are currently engaged in a substantial rehabilitation project of Crystal Lake, the lake specifically, and also the park area surrounding the lake. So they've removed a number of accumulated sediments, or a volume of accumulated sediments, and working to do some additional projects around the shoreline with an eye towards improving water quality. I don't think they're specifically targeting mercury, but it stands to reason that when you have that substantial shift in the particulates in the water body that the mercury may go along with it when those sediments leave. There is, we talked about, or I mentioned that, a lake takes atmospheric deposition and maybe it just adds up. This lake does have somewhat of an outfall or a release valve. There is an overflow that goes to the saline branch, one of these two branches that are listed here. It doesn't flow all the time. It's just lake level gets to some particular level and it overflows. So that's a release for some of that mercury as well. But that's the focus that the Park District has right now is the really substantial excessive nutrient loading that they're getting, and it's causing algae blooms, and which are harmful to some people's respiratory systems and also repellent to everyone's eyes. So that's what they're focused on right now, and then reestablishing a different type of shoreline that's gonna hopefully will limit resident geese access to the lake.
Thanks.
Yeah. There's a number of public engagement opportunities we took advantage of. They're listed here. It's been nice to be on the radio and get some articles published, mostly about solar Urbana-Champaign. That's always an easy one to get attention for. Everybody likes to hear about our solar program. Moving on to U-Cycle. I had reported that we had the electronics recycling, but we didn't have the numbers in yet. So those are here for you tonight, and you can see the charts. We're still doing 2 electronics recycling collection events a year. Those are all on local dollars, so Urbana-Champaign County, maybe a couple other municipalities, collaborate and fund on a per capita basis these electronics recycling events. The first chart you can see our tons have gone up, though the number of events is the same at 2. The second chart, really important one, again the number of events is the same, but the number of TVs we're collecting is actually going up. So these are, for the most part, CRT. Well, perhaps not all. A lot of them are CRT TVs, so tube TVs that are hard to get rid of, expensive to dispose of properly. No one wants to take them, which is, and it's a substantial portion of the cost that we have to pay for our electronics recycling events. So it's very discouraging that the numbers are going up. There's a finite number of tube TVs. No one's making them anymore. So at some point you think you'd get them all. But we haven't gotten them all. So we will continue on with that. On a related topic, the county, on behalf of all the municipalities, applied, as they always do every year that's available, for a household hazardous waste collection event from Illinois EPA. That is an event funded by Illinois EPA. And we were told that Urbana-Champaign County will not get an HHW event funded this year. The state has limited funding. They do a number of these every year, and they move it around to different locations every year. Urbana-Champaign or Champaign County has not had a collection event in 6 years. So folks who want to do the right thing and dispose of their chemicals properly have just been stockpiling it in basements and garages, which is not ideal. So we are told that there's going to be some collection events not too distant from Champaign County. So we'll do some communications. Since these are state funded, they aren't closed to outside residents. They're open to all residents in the state, so folks can travel. So look out for that soon. We'll be doing some communications. Also for U-Cycle, we've got some notes regarding some of their outreach activities, doing some outreach at apartment complexes with brochures, both door hanging, as well as sharing PDFs with the property management companies so that they can include that either digital or print in their welcome packages for their new residents. There have been some, perhaps an uptick in contamination issues at multifamily properties. So contamination with recycling means people are putting non-recyclable or non-acceptable items in the recycling toters. So that's problematic. If there's enough in there and the driver collecting the recyclables lifts a can and sees it, they simply don't collect it, because if they're just sorting garbage, that's a drag on the efficiency of that program. And so our standard operating procedure there is to contact the multifamily property and ask them to remove the garbage or tip that can into their dumpster, so that we can then start collecting recyclables again. Also want to note, recycling coordinator Courtney Kwong won a memorial grant or scholarship, travel scholarship, to attend the Resource Recycling Conference in St. Louis this year. This is kind of the biggest show in recycling every year, so that's a real honor and a nice opportunity for her. Next Sustainability Advisory Commission meeting would be September 4th at 7 p.m. It will be upstairs in the executive conference room. There will be a city council meeting in this room because there's a holiday on the Monday before.
Are there any questions from the commission about the staff report?
Yeah, sorry to go back to the beginning, but with the solar, CU Solar, do you know anything about, are there any businesses that are installing projects, or is it all residential? It's okay if you don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I remember seeing any commercial. I don't think there are any commercial yet, although we've had, I think there's been some commercial site assessments and proposals. I'm not sure there's been any contracts yet.
Yeah.
So I know there's some interest.
Did the installer end up fleshing out a power purchase agreement?
Yes, there is a power purchase agreement available. They're partnering with SunPower to provide a power purchase agreement. With SunPower is a national solar panel manufacturer and installer. And so that's available. And the vendor's also working on a community solar project as well. That is in, I guess, preliminary stages for lack of a finalized state incentive program. There was an announcement a day or two ago that let's see if I can remember, there was 2 stages. One stage of the state incentive program was going to be open in November. I think that was maybe qualifying the vendors, perhaps. And then the application for the project, I think, is in January. I know, Todd, you probably saw that too. So, for this, our vendors community solar project, for the city's landfill solar project, that's the timeline we're on. Hopefully
Great.
that'll move forward.
That's great, thank you.
So I had a question about the energy performance contract. Is that still alive, or what's the status of that one?
So we received, this was a while back, we received an investment grade audit. There was a possible project there, but it was marginal. And I'll describe why marginal. One, the initial cash flow that was presented to the city included the city contributing on the front end some cash that they had set aside for some particular improvements that would be rolled into that project, which is not exactly what we were looking for. We were looking for sort of a no money down scenario. Second, there was no scenario where we were cash flow neutral or better in year 1. So every scenario, so there was the maximalist project, a bundle of projects was something like $2 or $3 million in work, and that scenario, as well as the most minimal scenario, which is just doing the street lights, both of those were not cash flow positive in year one, meaning we would have to pay the loan and a little bit more for several years, and then it breaks even. Then you start saving money and you pay off the loan, and it's a savings project. The other barrier was the city's ability and appetite to take on debt. So you may have seen the mayor's budget address. We're working on paring down the budget and holding the line on debt and improving our financial situation. So all those things together has caused the city to just indefinitely pause that project. So we're not moving forward with it at this time, and the vendor is moving on to other projects.
Is there any alternate thoughts on, I mean, there's projects that need to get done, obviously. Any thoughts on alternate pathways, or relating a bid for other vendors that might, have better capabilities or ability to identify projects, or just pause for now?
Yeah, I mean, some of those projects were replacing older equipment that would be more, the replacement would be more efficient, but the equipment's running right now.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to keep running it. Some of those projects are decent energy savers on their own merits, such as LED streetlights, but they're going to require cash or loan. And until such time that we're prepared for that, I'm not sure that there's anything to do with that sort of project just yet. We could contemplate that. Another vendor has a better way to get us to cash flow neutral in year one. But we did a qualifications-based selection of an experienced vendor. Lots of projects that they've done, well regarded, and if they didn't find such a project, it seems unlikely that others would. Time changes things, prices go up or go down. It may be worthy in a few years to look at either a very specific project like LED street lighting, or resetting the whole thing. But I think we're paused for a couple of years probably on that.
Okay, thanks for the update.
The question that I have is, could you elaborate a little bit more on the downstate caucus of the Illinois Climate Table? Who is comprising that organization? Is it mostly like cities and towns, or is this an effort of some of the other organizations that organize around climate issues in the state? I'm just interested in learning a little bit more, and I know that it said here that there's a September or October session in Champaign-Urbana. Do you have any more information on how much time a session would, comprise? How much time should we expect to, attend for if we would like to go?
Sure. The organization, both the statewide climate table as well as the downstate caucus, which is a subset of the table, is mostly populated by nonprofit organizations, research organizations, advocacy organizations, education organizations. I've been attending those meetings as well. And it's not exactly the same, but it is very similar to the grouping that advocated and passed the Future Energy Jobs Act. And so, with that act being passed, a lot of those groups reformed this Illinois Climate Table and Downstate Caucus to support implementation of that act. You would think that, you pass a law, it's self-implementing, but there is, so much public engagement included in the act, and so much rulemaking that will come out of the act that there's still a lot of work to be done to put it into, into implementation. They're also, with the Listen, Lead, Share, are looking to the future in terms of formulating an agenda for future energy and climate activities and legislation. And so that's the goal of these listening sessions, is to learn what folks' priorities are and interests are, and convert that into advocacy and lobbying agenda. As to how long the prospective event would be, I don't know the answer to that, although I suspect it's something like an hour or an hour and a half guided public engagement opportunity.
My take on that group is that policy advocacy, and I think maybe for the city in a group like this, to the extent that they seem to be focused as state level policy. There might be more national level focus, but I think to the extent that this group or the city thinks that state policy of certain types could help us do for the city, making I don't know, advocacy for programs that could make certain types of things more affordable. So like the city could do the energy performance contract. That just, to pick up one example, that could be an avenue for, support and advocating for stuff. So just an additional comment on that.
And do you think it would be possible for a member of the youth or a high school student to attend and to participate in such a meeting? I'm
In the
hoping
listening
so.
sessions?
Yeah, in the listening sessions.
They're absolutely open to the public, and
Oh, okay.
hopefully lots of folks come. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, well, I'll share that information when it becomes available.
Are there any other questions about the staff report for Scott? Are there any questions about the staff report from any members of the audience, or would like to address the board at this time? Okay. All right, next on the agenda is going to be discussion of climate action plan and greenhouse gas reduction strategies. Are you going to present? Okay, thanks.
Changing seats so I can point to a document while we discuss.
There were some, I
So
don't
the
know, it
two
looks like
Sorry, go ahead.
these, like Excel
Exactly.
sheets that are really hard to see, and maybe I should have printed them landscape-wise, so that way I'm not,
Did I PDF them?
I don't know what you did.
Properly? Or?
That's okay. They're itty-bitty. Are you able to bring that up on the screen?
Yeah, I will.
Thanks.
So just to set this up, staff was asked in lieu of pursuing something like a new tax or fee to fund energy and climate activities, we were asked to look at what would be some of the highest impact strategies to pursue. And that proposes some challenges that I outlined in the packet. One of the challenges is, things like take any particular practice. They're so highly contextual. So whether something is feasible, in California versus Urbana is totally different because their electricity is 20 cents a kilowatt hour and ours is, 7 or whatever it is, 11 cents. And so, doing some basic literature review, there really isn't any listing of here are the top 5, here are the top 12 most impactful greenhouse gas strategies, because they're just very context sensitive. One exception to that rule is a publication called, I've got it listed here somewhere, Drawdown, which is the 100 most impactful greenhouse gas reduction strategies. But those are, I mentioned the problem is everything's so context sensitive. Those have no context, that is, they're global. So they have no relationship really to any, all 100 have no relationship to any single municipality. So, for instance, one of the higher ranking greenhouse gas reduction strategies is educating women and girls. That's not something that in the U.S. context, in the Urbana context, that box is checked. We could contribute to those type of activities in other places, but it's not an activity we can really improve on in a substantial way that's going to affect energy and climate or greenhouse gas inventory here. And so I've sort of turned this activity just a little bit. It happened that while we were working on this, the Downstate Caucus of the Illinois Climate Table asked me to look into not the highest impact strategies, but greenhouse gas strategies that would be useful, relevant, impactful, appropriate to the community norms in the downstate area, as distinct from upstate Chicago, other cities, country, world. And so I went through a number of resources, Project Drawdown, the Drawdown book I mentioned, the NREL document, Low Carbon City, or Carbon Free City Handbook, and the STAR Community Index System. And so I went through those and essentially culled them for strategies that clearly have a greenhouse gas impact, are practical for downstate communities, and are appropriate for the sort of cultural, political expectations of those communities. And I think I've got it here. I'll show you. That was this list. It's ICT, Illinois Climate Table. And let me zoom this in for you since the printout might not have been helpful. So there's a title of the practice on the left, a short description, and then the source, one of those 3 publications I mentioned, and also the page number. So again, this is sort of a shortened list of all the practices in those three publications that were impactful, seemed financially feasible, and culturally appropriate for all of downstate Illinois. So that means that things like these agricultural practices that are at the bottom, those are appropriate and useful and interesting for folks in downstate communities to consider. However, not really appropriate to Urbana's urban context. We don't have any significant agriculture going on within the city. And so what I did is I took this list and culled it even further for our purposes, for this notion of going through an exercise to kind of narrow down and contemplate what would be, again, impactful, feasible, and appropriate. And so this is the list that I came up with. I don't know if I pulled out. I might have pulled out a few things that we've already done. Yeah, I think Commercial Buildings Challenge was in the Downstate Caucus list, but it's not in this list that I've titled SAC, because we've done that. We did that for 3 years, and the program was successful, and participation plateaued, and so the partners chose to discontinue it. So some things that are, mostly things that are, familiar. So municipal building retrofits, that I included that because we have attempted it, but we didn't complete it. We just talked about that. That was the Guaranteed Energy Savings Project. Net zero codes, going above and beyond the standard or typical International Energy Conservation Code. That's an interesting one. However, when you're in a metro region with 2 sides or 3 sides, if one side passes more stringent building codes, you run the risk, or at least the perception, that development goes to the other side of town. So that may be one that's better at a metro or a statewide basis. Progressive codes, they're the same. Fleet electrification, we've purchased 1 EV for our fleet so far.
Can you go back to the progressive codes? What does that mean?
My recollection is that is about, it's about when, I think it's when something changes in the building, you have to upgrade to a higher efficiency level, something like that.
Okay, okay,
Don't remember all the details.
okay.
Fleet electrification, we're well, we've talked about this here, actually. We've purchased one EV, and we wrote some draft specs, best of our ability for that sort of thing, and shared that with the state office that does procurement. That's important because whatever contract prices they get, all the municipalities can use those contract prices to buy things like vehicles. And so far they haven't bid an electric vehicle. There is another effort with some mayoral staffs group. They're working with a national joint purchase organization. Again, another thing that does the competitive selection and lets any municipality buy things off of that contract. And they are, they're doing, I think the number is 4 or 6 or 8 EVs on their joint purchasing procurement. And that particular joint purchasing authority, I know the city has been a member of in the past, and I suspect we still are. So those will be available to us to purchase. So that's back in the mix for us, although we are, the city is simultaneously pursuing and evaluating moving a number of vehicles to a lease to reduce costs. And so that potentially could be another opportunity if this leaseor offers EVs. So those things are still in play. I'm working on them, and we'll be meeting about the leasing of the vehicles soon. LED streetlights, another one that we'd love to do. We talked about our attempt at it and haven't quite made it feasible yet. Municipal solar installations. We were pretty early in that. We had one of the first public sector power purchase agreements in the state. So we've done that. One of our barriers is most of our roofs are needing replacement in the short term, and so it's not financially it makes the project a lot less feasible if you include the cost of installing the panels twice. Installing, uninstalling for the roof repair, and then installing again. We do have a new roof on one of our fire stations, but that fire station is potentially in the near term could relocate, and so again, it's not a strong candidate for us to do a power purchase agreement on that. Municipal renewable energy supply. We are not buying renewable energy credits, although if we're able to develop a solar array on our own landfill, and if the price was competitive, we may be able to shift some of our municipal load onto renewable. Organic waste diversion is something staff is doing review on in terms of a curbside food scrap subscription service, but no activity yet. Urban forestry, that actually probably should be removed because we have a fantastic urban forestry program. And in fact, the city arborist was successful at working with some local folks to get some extra dollars to plant additional trees this year. Do you have a comment, question?
Well, I just want to have a question and maybe just ask for a clarification. It sounds like you're going through the things right now that are things that we would like to do or things that we would like the city to have the opportunity to do. And you were saying that, oh, well, you might remove like the urban forestry one because we have a great program. I just want to make sure that, so the idea when you're talking about removing these items from this list isn't to say that, well, these programs wouldn't continue and that we wouldn't be concerned about them in the future, but
Right.
that they're just not appearing here because we're doing well with that. So early on, I had wrote down some notes like, well, the greenhouse gas inventory and the solar-friendly codes and energy challenge, recycling, like we've done those things, we do those things, or at least the, recycling and things like that. So it's not actually appearing here just because we're hitting the bar.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Bus bike walk is in there. We do a lot for that. It's hard to say if you ever do enough. But certainly we have a very extensive bicycle master plan, which is substantially built out already. You may have seen an announcement. The city secured a grant, a planning grant, to study an extension of the Kickapoo Rail Trail further into Urbana. So that's another element of the bus bike walk. We enjoy an award-winning bus service that's metropolitan wide. They're actually, and just to go a little further on that, they're buying, I think it's 2 hydrogen-powered buses and building their own hydrogen fueling station, and are very interested in powering that fuel station with renewable electricity. So that's a strong one for us. You may recall that the city had the Regional Planning Commission do a sidewalk or walking infrastructure assessment, and so that's going to lead into some planning and some capital improvement plans. So we're strong there, although I leave it in because it seems like there's always more to do there. Property assessed clean energy we've discussed, and that's the law is passed, and so staff is making some inquiries to see if the city wants to pursue that further. Environmental justice is in here, not because it specifically counts down greenhouse gases, although there is the notion of getting more people involved, gets you more greenhouse gas reductions. But the Illinois Climate Table, being a big tent, includes environmental justice or equity in everything they do, and organizations that specifically bring an equity lens participate in that. And you can see that in the outcome of the legislation that was passed. It wasn't the renewable energy legislation, it was future energy jobs. So jobs is an important aspect of that. And so that's in here too, and I think we can do more on that. Green infrastructure, we have the stormwater utility, which provides, they call them credits and incentives, but if you go to another city, the same things are called green infrastructure. Rain gardens, rain barrels, runoff rate reduction, runoff volume reduction. So we're doing that, although I'll leave that in there because I think there may be more we can do. Almost all of the stormwater utility incentives and credits that have been claimed have been the rain barrel sales. So I think there's some opportunities out there. Tree canopy is an interesting one. It's a different way to look at your urban forest, not just the number of trees or how many dBA they are, but looking at how much coverage you get, because in terms of a canopy, coverage playing into how much shading you're getting on houses so that they're using less electricity and so on. So that's an interesting one. To my knowledge, we have not done a tree canopy assessment. I don't know if that's done with aerial photography and some computer analysis maybe. But that would be an interesting one. And a different way to think about goal setting, rather than a tree every 20, 30 feet or whatever it may be. Instead, think about, where there are gaps in the canopy. And then micro wind is in here. Let's see which one. I think that's Drawdown. I'm interested in that one because Urbana got way ahead of the game years ago, passed a wind energy ordinance which regulates the size of wind electricity generating assets, depending on where you're at. And I think that would be an interesting opportunity, not everywhere, but maybe properties that are larger, commercial on the edge of town, could potentially meet the zoning requirements and be appropriate for that location. So I'll pause there. Those are practices from these 3 resources that I think are impactful, feasible, and relevant.
Any questions?
Scott, when you put the list together, did you think, I mean, you were just talking about the budget situation and sort of the unlikeliness that there would be money available to expend on these kind of projects in the near future. So when you put this list together, did you do it sort of with an eye towards thinking about things that don't necessarily require a financial investment, like changes to codes and things like that, that have an impact when development happens, as opposed to us going out and spending money to do something?
I didn't specifically screen out strategies that would have a cost, would have a upfront cash cost. It was quite a while ago, but there might have been strategies that were obviously big money spenders that we're not going to get into. I'll give you an example. I think waste to energy is in the drawdown book. Well, we're not going to, do a capital investment in a waste to energy plant. So that one's screened out, perhaps, just on financials. But so take bus, bike, walk, which is in here. Building bicycle infrastructure costs money. Sometimes not a lot, painting, restriping a road, but that's still money. There's still, expenditures there. So there's still some things in here that imply some spending. One of the things we talk about, there's no, in the sustainability division budget, there's no funding for energy and climate. Nonetheless, there are things that are energy and climate expenditures. For instance, when the engineering division builds out bicycle infrastructure, that's an expenditure in a certain sense on energy and climate activities. And in terms of a little bit broader sustainability picture, green infrastructure, which gets included in here, but it maybe is not a very explicit greenhouse gas project. That also has substantial expenditures, not out of my division's budget, out of another one, but you can count that as a sustainability expenditure. An interesting one to me, though, is property assessed clean energy, in that while there would be some staff time inputs, once it's set up, there's no cash necessary from the city. The city doesn't have to spend money on programming. We don't have to, my anticipation is that cities will not spend money on vendors, that vendors will take fees from deal flow, and that properties will get private sector lending. They're not going to get, maybe a few cities, but I think most cities are not going to participate in lending or even securing loans or backing loans. There was some activity from the Illinois Finance Authority. I haven't followed up on that, but they may take an interest in being a funding or financing source for PACE programs too. So, some different opportunities there, but I think for myself, in terms of thinking about implementation, I'm thinking more of the ones that require no additional cash input, or some funding source that's in another division that's already doing that type of work.
Do you see items on here that could line, if we look to the, capital planning process for next fiscal year, do you see any alignment in here?
Yeah, potentially the LED streetlights. We talked about how we weren't able to do a project there.
Mhm.
However, we've been putting in LED streetlights for years, small project at a time. So sometimes that's a section of road that's never had streetlights. Sometimes that's a section that's being rebuilt, and the streetlights are of some very old technology, and maybe they're getting relocated. We take that opportunity. So we did a project in the campus town area, just west of Lincoln, and and there were new streetlights put in for that, and so those are all LED. So we're not at 0% LED. We're just inching up, on a cash basis at this point.
On the green infrastructure item, do you see a connection to that in the climate action plan?
No, I think
At least for Urbana.
I think it got included in there just because it's an interest and something we're working on.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
yeah.
after the fact, I thought, well, that doesn't really have a connection to
Okay.
greenhouse gases. It doesn't need to be in this list.
Okay. Well, anyway, it is still an interest of this group, and, obviously that's another one that has possible connections to capital planning processes. So we talk about permeable pavements and that kind of stuff. I don't know. We've got sidewalks and other kinds of stuff. Anyway, any way we can get in front of some of those, I mean, we talked a little bit about it earlier in the spring, but at that point, it's pretty much here's what we're going to do. Anyway, we can get in front of that.
I think that's a good idea. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and the checking in whether there is any potential street lighting projects every time the capital plan is renewed is great. Bus bike walk, we actually we don't have to ask engineers to plan for the bike infrastructure. They've got the plan and they do it as much as funding allows. We're sustainability division is supporting the development of the walking infrastructure, and we're also supporting the development of a stormwater master plan, again leaving greenhouse gases for a moment and going to the green infrastructure. And so that's going to be a focus, whether finding opportunities that make sense to go from gray to green and still provide the same level of protection and put more water down instead of shooing it away.
A couple more questions, or maybe a question and a comment. So we know where sort of other activities in the city are maybe aligned with some of these items on the list. Are you aware of areas where the city is doing things in terms of plans and policies, regulations that are maybe working at cross odds with some of the things on this list? That's sort of the question. And then the comment, or maybe another question is, I'm just wondering if there's room for sort of larger considerations of kind of urban form, more comprehensive planning, zoning kind of considerations in terms of where the city is incentivizing or disincentivizing growth through different plans and policies that gets incorporated somewhat in the bus bike walk kind of aspect, but is maybe not talked about explicitly.
I think, as you know, I'm personally interested in the urban form aspect. One element that we've made to improve upon that, at least in the downtown area, is there's a lighter or maybe a removal of parking requirements for new development. You just look at an aerial from 1930 and then 1990 of any city, and you see 1930, the city's full of buildings, and 1990, it's full of parking lots. That has a lot of problems. The sustainability issue of, you're inviting folks to drive, and when you spread out buildings by putting big parking lots between them, you're forcing folks to drive, and it's not really walkable. No one would ever choose to walk in that kind of environment. And so there's been, and I don't know the details, but I know there's been some improvements on that in the downtown district at least. We're in maybe a lull in large-scale development. We've had some really nice infill, actually. Two projects I can think of on Lincoln Avenue, one just north of Green, Western Avenue, and one just at the corner of Nevada, which have been infill or increasing in intensity projects. And so, from a sustainability angle, those are wonderful because they're both very walkable. They're on bus routes. They're not on the edge of town. So, you know, that's encouraging. I don't immediately have an idea of where we're at crosswise with another project explicitly, but you know, it may be warranted to consider the urban form aspect, you know, for future developments, especially subdivisions. This planning division was working on some subdivision revisions. I don't remember if that went through, but we participated in that and made some recommendations with an eye towards urban form and sustainability. The upshot there is that I'll follow up on that.
Any thoughts on how we might think about environmental justice in Urbana?
I think the first thing to do is to start building relationships with all the neighborhoods, but especially ones that may be disenfranchised on geography, race, class, and find some common language. You know, no one cares about metric tons of greenhouse gases, right? That's not going to be common language to most people.
Sure.
But find some common language, more quality of life language, and take any, you know, quality of life phrase or word, and you can find a sustainability angle to it. I think maybe that's our first task. And when we get into, and this will be the next agenda topic, when we get into another round of comprehensive or strategic planning, I think that's an opportunity to work on building some relationships, inviting folks in, having more people at the table.
Sounds good. Yeah, I quality of life, I think, is a common denominator for everybody. Okay.
Yeah, you know, it may not mean anything to anyone that if we had such a number, if that 73% of Urbana is tree canopied. 73% good or bad? I have no idea what's normal, what's typical. But you know, the quality of life angle would be, you know, every Urbana street, every Urbana sidewalk is shaded. People get that. That communicates.
What's so there's I guess this is coming with comprehensive planning exercise.
What I was referring to is what kind of you know, guidebook do we have for when the climate action plan phases out?
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just curious if this discussion and looking at this list, both of them, have sparked any thoughts from members of the commission about, you know, is there anything that you see that stands out to you that was missing in some way? I'm not saying that there is anything missing, but I see this as a little bit of a creative process where we can participate and have input on this list. And I know that I'm interested in going back and sort of reviewing the Carbon Free City Handbook and looking a little bit more at the STARS communities and Project Drawdown, and seeing if collectively or individually, if there was anything that we seem to have missed that might synergize really well, or that we might be able to bring to the table and look at it from a slightly different angle. I know that you focus on this stuff every day. And so I'm just, you know, tapping into our collective expertise and our creativity to contribute to this process in some way. I guess that's a comment and not really a question.
Yeah, I guess my earlier comment I would throw into what you're asking for there. A lot of what's on the list here are initiatives that would be focused on individual buildings or structures, and I would just think that it would be important to think about this beyond the scale of an individual house or a building, to think about how these things fit together in neighborhoods and as the city as a whole. You know, where the city is prioritizing development, infill versus, you know, new subdivisions on not that those are happening with any frequency, but the city would like those things to happen, right, in some way or another, or at least some people in the city would. So what do those look like? What does the zoning say about those? Does that mesh with what we would like to see happen with this other list here?
Yeah, it's interesting. These three fairly prominent resources, none of them touched on urban form, sort of that somewhat holistic perspective, despite, a lot of attention to urban form in the last 10, 20 years, and a lot of change to planning, zoning, permitting practices in cities because of it.
Is there any category for city investment for developers for sustainability? So incentives for developers to include sustainability in their
Yeah,
development.
STAR has some items that talk about incentivizing different activities, but more efficient buildings or that sort of thing. We have in our TIF, we have some of that. There's extra points that can be earned from getting some energy assessments and making some improvements to the property. From beyond the TIF, which is has its funding source as the increment of increased increment of tax, that gets us into a position of spending more city dollars or foregoing city revenues. So it's a challenge. I think PACE solves that challenge, or has a potential to, in that it's something that municipalities can do that improves feasibility for energy and renewable projects.
Thinking if a subdivision gets built and the developer is incentivized to put a community solar farm in or a district geothermal system in, if there's no incentive, that's not an option probably.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I'm not an expert in the TIF rules, but setting that aside for a moment, we probably don't charge enough in permit fees to give back enough money to incentivize those projects. So it gets us into both a foregoing revenue and a providing cash problem. There's the zoning, which if you build, if you follow the zoning, you kind of can go by right. You have the rights to go. There is another pathway, parcel unit development, which has more broadly drawn rules, and you enter into more of a negotiation on the final project design. That's where give and take can occur, and one of the takes could be energy efficiency or renewables. I don't know that we get a lot of PUDs. They can be fairly small, but not sure a lot of folks are using that pathway.
Are there any final thoughts? Yeah.
I guess this goes to the urban form comments and zoning and codes, and thinking about how we have how do we accomplish a walkable community? Some of it is like, well, do we live close to where we do our daily business? So not everybody can walk to where they work, but if we have zoning that allows people to walk to where they shop and do those kinds of things. Anyways, we have some of that, but there's still a lot of residential neighborhoods that are not walkable to places that they go to. So I wonder if we have opportunities to explore that. There can be ties with local resiliency and new local small businesses and things like that. But anyway, that's one thing that kind of comes up with the urban form, and maybe more walkable communities where we let stuff be.
Okay. Shall we move on to the discussion of the timeline for the
Sure.
next planning effort?
Sure, and just to wrap this up, my
Sure.
view here was that this would be an interesting reflection as we come into maybe the last year or so of our existing climate action plan. A lot of these things already align with the plan and also with some of our preliminary activities or even first attempts. And so an opportunity for you all to reflect upon things you may want to recommend the city to focus on. And also something that will inform our, our next agenda topic, what planning we do in the future. Although this would be sort of the wonky expert side of a planning engagement, which shouldn't be all of that. So, moving on to the next agenda item, I realized that weeks ago I had prepared just a few PowerPoint slides to kind of guide this discussion, and then since then I finished it and 100 things have happened, so I completely forgot about it. But let's start with just the simplest issue here, which is just a timing issue. So what I've got here is the schedule for the two greenhouse gas inventories we do. So we do a community inventory and a government operations and facilities inventory every other year on opposing years. So that would be, so in the first column you see the data year. So, if we have a 2018 greenhouse gas inventory, that's for all of the greenhouse gases generated in 2018. Well, you can't conduct that inventory in 2018 because you don't have all the data because the year's not over yet. So what you do for a 2018 inventory is you conduct it in early 2019. So you'll see completed in spring of on the far right column. So thinking about this climate action plan, it wasn't explicit whether it concludes at the beginning of 2020 or the end, so we have opportunities, we have options. If you look, we finish a 2019 calendar year, data year, community inventory in early 2020. So one opportunity or one possibility would be to maybe start planning our planning effort, but not begin it until that 2019 data year is completed in early 2020. Then we have the latest information for our community-wide greenhouse gases to share with the public when we talk to them. Otherwise, there can be kind of a gap. It's nice to have that fresh data. If we wanted to wait, our next community inventory would be for data year 2021, not to be completed until early 2022. Does that make sense? I'm not getting a lot of head nods. One head nod.
So I just want to think about this, that it isn't necessarily in terms of the greenhouse inventory and the work that's involved in doing those inventories that would put us off from writing the next climate action plan, but more that we are very interested in the data from having as much data as we possibly can through the existing climate action plan years in order to inform what we would take on in the climate action plan going forward.
Right.
So to me it sounds like there's a year gap between when that's completed and the next climate action plan begins, which is a little confusing. I'm not really sure that where would the gap occur?
So let me play out just one scenario, one potential scenario. We go through 2019. In the spring of 2020, we collect all the data for a community greenhouse gas inventory, run it through the model, and come out with our outcome. Our greenhouse gas reduction is X% from our 2007 baseline. At that point, we could initiate a planning endeavor to design a plan for greenhouse gas reductions that would go from, January 2021, for instance, which would not be out of line with our current climate action plan, which is listed as, to or through, it's not clear, 2020. So in that sense, there wouldn't, you may not conceive of a gap if you have one plan that ends in 2020 and another one that you declare starts January 1, 2021. And you would have 9 months of 2020 where you would have the most recent, you would have 2019 community greenhouse gas data on hand. Now we could start planning what we want to do for a planning effort before we have that 2019 data year inventory in hand. But I think it would be desirable to start talking to the public when we have that most recent data, rather than right in the middle of the effort, that data comes in. Although maybe you would find it not to be that important. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea of having the baseline information that you are using to talk about current conditions with the community is a good idea. It makes sense.
Do we have an opportunity to do simultaneous community inventory and government inventory?
It's technically possible. Possibly, but describe more what you're interested in.
Well, so I'm looking in this pattern of, we've got this pattern of X's. So we have a number of data points, and we've gone through a number of exercises where we look at the data. Okay, we've got the greenhouse gas inventory data. We've got energy data. And the more of these that we have, the more informative the picture becomes as to whether we have a trend. So I'm really interested in every year is different, and so if we just look at 2007 in the most recent, there's something there, and there's a lot missing. But if we can present trend lines for what's going on, and so I'm kind of interested in like the when we arrive at a point, how many data points do we have on the community inventory side and the government inventory side, and can we present those so that we can see a trajectory? Are we just seeing because when we've looked at the energy, sometimes we see, well, maybe it's just bouncing around. Is this weather? Is it who knows what? And so, anyways, we can still get that by waiting a year. But I guess where I'm going is, well, if we can, if it is possible and economically and technically possible, to get those data points and have that full story of the of trends, rather than just year to year scatter, and kind of keep it moving along.
Okay, but just this one time. There's a fair amount of staff time to
I'm
collect
sure.
all this data and
sure.
put it through the model. But I get what you're saying. If we're doing a planning exercise that is based on data to some degree, it'd be great to have both inventories for data year 2019 to be completed early, spring 2020, and have both of those available so that we would have the latest data for that. I'm concerned about doing either one of those inventories every single year, just from a staff time perspective.
I wouldn't argue with that,
Yeah.
yeah. Is the inventories from previous years, so we see X's on 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, are these all comparable format so that we can present them on trend lines and say, here is where we are headed?
These all use, yes, these all use ICLEI's ClearPath tool.
Okay. So
No
we can
other
compare them
tool.
to each other.
Now, is the tool identical every year? In some ways, yeah. I'm trying to think if there's been any significant changes to it. I mean, certainly greenhouse gas intensities of our grid, which goes into the model, that changes every time, but
Mhm.
that should change.
Sure.
It's not really a methodology change. I don't think there's been any methodology change that I can think of. All the same tool.
Okay.
And that's line 10 actually should be green. That one's done.
So I was in favor of, I think, Stacy, you were trying to, can we keep it moving? I'm in favor of that. If we can get more data, that would be good at the same time.
Yeah, I think I was just trying to figure out so in what year would we say that we were going to collect the community and government inventory for? So that would be for both 2019? Was that your idea? And then in 2020, write the report about 2019. In 2020, in the spring, start a community engagement process. And you've mentioned it a couple of times, or we've mentioned it a couple of times. What do you envision that community engagement process to look like?
Yeah, great question. And that was what I had so carefully prepared in a PowerPoint. So I'm going to try and reconstruct it from memory. Just lingering on timing a little bit longer, it may be advisable for this group to discuss further, how we want this planning effort to proceed in, the last 3 months of 2019. Considering that in the first 3 months of 2020, hopefully 2 months, but typically 3 months, staff will be spending time on actually doing the greenhouse gas inventories. So it may be advisable to get some of that planning work and dialogue about how this group wants to do that public engagement activity in late 2019. So in terms of your interest in keeping things moving, that will be some early work. So to your other question, how do we want to? And these are very preliminary comments, but one sort of general framework occurs to me. In the past, we've done a planning or a planned document development procedure where staff does some work, from the position of the subject matter expert, brings it to the Sustainability Advisory Commission as subject matter experts and representatives of the community, and there is some dialogue and iteration that repeats a few times. A draft plan is produced, a draft document. The document is 98% completed. That is shared for public comment, and some folks make some comments, and we edit the last 2%, and that's done. That's one framework. Another framework could invert that, whereby we don't have staff produce the document, and where it's kind of a done deal, and then folks can say a few things about it, but instead talk to the public first, do some public engagement first, and potentially, and this is somewhat informed by the what's in your square effort, but draw out with an eye towards energy and climate, draw out folks' values their priorities, and then connect those, going back to using language that people understand, community quality of life language, then connect those to the greenhouse gas strategies that are associated with those values and priorities. So if no one is if no one cares about fleet electrification or even electric cars, if that's not a priority, it's not saying we won't necessarily pursue it at some angle, but maybe it's not a priority in the plan if there are other aspects that are more important. So maybe urban form, and again, that's a technical word, no one would say that, but maybe, nice communities or walkable communities or communities where you can get a cup of coffee without driving, whatever the layperson's quality of life language might be about that. Maybe urban form is more important than fleet electrification. But if we decide all those from a technical aspect first, it kind of locks in, what's going to happen. So let me pause there and let you reflect on those two trajectories.
So the public input first sounds great, but to do that and do it well usually costs money, at least in terms of what I've seen and what I'm familiar with. So is there a budget for that kind of thing, and or how do you envision pulling that off with your staff, yourself, I guess?
There's no budget. There is our typical discretionary budget of $1,800 or whatever it is, so we can buy some cranberry juice for 1 or 2 events. Yeah, very relevant question. So certainly we read about these brilliant, public engagement efforts, and they get hundreds of people involved. And the article rarely mentions that, they hired a consultant to do it. Then it doesn't take any staff time, really. You just manage the consultant, of course. And they've done it 100 times in the last year because that's all they do. And so they have it down to a science. And so, yeah, it goes great. We don't have that luxury. So we would have to, do some literature review and learn the best we can about a few strategies that we can employ that don't cost any cash. And, one of the things we may accept is it won't be as good as the articles you read in the magazine because we don't have those resources. But it'll be, with an eye towards those best practices.
Are there other thoughts on the 2 different types of strategies and whether or not you're leaning towards one or the other, just as a sort of gut feeling at this point?
It seems like there's an opportunity to start doing, when we start doing public engagement, it could be an open question. And, I don't know if we have an opportunity to start doing the engagement so that maybe we have an opportunity to find out, is there enough interest that bubbles up? Are we able to kind of put it out there in a way to identify, are there people that are going to be willing to kind of step up and participate in a more, towards the more participatory model? Or are we, I don't know, does that not turn out to be the case, and then we revert to the traditional model? I don't really know if that's a way that we can do it, but I think we would have to get started with some reasonable quality facilitation and promotion to at least give that one side a shot of happening.
I think that's a great point. If we keep it open-ended, ask people to share values and priorities with an eye towards sustainability or energy and climate, resilience, and no one shows up, well, we can always fall back on Plan B, which is, this group, produces what they think are their values, their priorities, and we'll produce a plan that way.
And, I wonder with, since there's lead time, so I would hate to put, a fresh, green student in a really high-profile leading kind of thing, but, there are folks that are, going deep into grad studies and learning about all kinds of stuff related to this, and maybe pursuing some ability to do facilitation. So anyways, I wonder if we have the ability to tap, some students that can leverage their, some of their educational objectives, and if somehow if this lines up, I don't even know if that's a good idea. It really depends on who's out there and what they're doing, but that might be something.
Any other comments on that one? Okay, I'll go to the next topic, the next item within this topic. We have in the past done a climate action plan, and we've also done a water management plan separately. I think the group should contemplate whether they want another water plan, they want another climate plan, or whether they want a sustainability plan that would integrate, any and all things. Some of these edges sort of blur over into other things like urban form or transportation. Sometimes there's no firm borders, and water is another example. When we conserve water, we also conserve energy because it takes pumps to move that water. Communities do it both ways. Some keep on going with climate plan after climate plan, and some do a sustainability plan. Clearly, the sustainability plan is a bigger bite because that could, that's a big tent.
I guess you'd have to consider whether doing another water plan actually is needed, in a sense that if you've got the basis for it already and you're just continuing it on, you might, unless something's changing, drastically changing. But
Yeah.
What are the years of the existing water plan?
Also to 2020.
The engagement process that we're talking about with the climate action plan, depending how we frame it and facilitate it, we could focus on climate. We could leave it to be open to, it could be something that addresses climate, water, sustainability generally. I don't know, that might be difficult, but anyway, just right now anything is possible. So it could be completely open, and depending on how things unfold, we could produce a climate plan out of it, a water plan or a sustainability plan, as separate things, or we might imagine some hybrid products coming out of that, depending on how it goes. That's one. If we're planning a stakeholder process, maybe we might get other things out of it other than climate.
And just to take the pressure off, we don't have to decide tonight. You can think about this for a month and we can talk about it again.
I would guess that a plan focused on sustainability more broadly, particularly if you broaden the definition of sustainability, would have the potential to bring in more of the community, particularly if it's framed around quality of life issues, in a way that this narrow focus on greenhouse gas emissions and climate action plan would certainly have stakeholders that are interested in that, but it might not be something that the community as a whole, is thinking about and is willing to commit time to participate in. So, from the participation standpoint, it might be worthwhile to frame it or to talk about it from the perspective of sustainability more broadly, but when it comes to being able to address from a technical standpoint some of these agreements or commitments that the city has recently made in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, I think it's hard not to have at least at some point have a focus that is fairly narrowly focused on doing those things and how you best achieve those things, which may or may not align with some of the things that people are more interested more broadly in terms of quality of life and sustainability, jobs and the economy and equity issues, which are important aspects of sustainability, but I don't know, may not necessarily be as clearly linked to energy efficiency and reduction in greenhouse gases.
Yeah, I think the city's adoptive goals, 25% reduction in GHG by 2020, 100% renewable electricity for community-wide by, I think that year was 2025, and carbon neutrality by 2040. I think those are going to be in any document produced, right? Those are, we're not overruling those council adopted goals. So they'll be in there in some respect, in some piece of content.
That's why you had something?
I'm just going to respond to what Todd was saying, that our thinking could be more comprehensive, holistic, so that we can, even when we focus on strictly energy issues, we can still, as much as possible, also think of the broader concerns that we have. And so without not limit ourselves to very narrow goals at the beginning, at least. As we go, we can narrow or specify more.
Yeah, just to go back on this, I mean, if you're going to go through this effort, whatever the effort ends up being, it's going to be substantial, and it's going to require, the substantial commitment of the staff's time plus the committee's time, the commission's time, in terms of making that happen. So I would think, why not get input more broadly that we can then parse, to focus on what specific goals or objectives should be in relation to the climate action plan or relation to the water, management plan, something like that.
I want to be a little bit mindful of time this evening. It's about 8:40, and so I'm going to, I think, withhold comments on the subject for myself until the next meeting. I'm wondering if there is consensus from the group that we would continue this discussion into the September committee meeting to continue talking about planning. Okay, so it looks like that's fine, and that we'll add that to continuing business. one other thing that what was I just thinking? Well, a couple of things. One is I want to see how we can engage youth in this process. We are working on SU Youth Sustainability Summit for this year. If it is successful, I see an opportunity. There's no reason why that couldn't be a program that follows into the second year, and in the second year we may have interest and student volunteers who are also sort of interested in these topics and want to be continuing working on these things with us, and that the summit in the fall, it just presents to me a real, a good opportunity, I think, to continue to dialogue with youth in our community about this stuff, right? The timing is also sort of interesting if I'm thinking about it being August right now. So there's only 4 more months in this year. 2019 then, another 8 months or so until we want to kick it off. So we do have just maybe a little over a year to kick things off. So as we're working through ideas at the committee level at this point, I think it's good to know that, like, we have to be able to make some progress in some of the dialogue and the discussions to choose a path. I did hear a bit of like, well, if we go with one direction, we can always change, and I want to be appreciative of Dustin's comments that there will be significant investment in whatever process we choose. It may not be the easiest thing just to switch gears and say, okay, now we're going to do this other thing because this thing wasn't working. But I think that's okay, and I think that we can come up with, something in the next few months as a framework for the plan. And I would propose that some of the ideas that we're having now and formulating now makes its way into some sort of outline form, outline document, something on paper that will outline the process and the different dates, milestones that we want to reach over the next year. And so we can sort of track our progress that way. And lastly, I am curious about an idea of forming an ad hoc committee similar to the outreach committee, which we didn't have on our agenda this evening, but an ad hoc committee that would like to work on bringing some of these ideas sort of to the table for us to discuss together in meetings instead of hashing through all the ideas together.
It would have to be an ad hoc of 2 or less if you want to discuss this outside of the SAC meeting.
Ad hoc 2 or less. Okay. Let's kick that idea around for a second. Is anyone really excited about, would be excited about doing some of that work outside of a meeting and dialoguing 2 or less? Oh, man.
It doesn't
I know,
include me,
that's not
by the way.
fair. Right.
So that could
The outreach is currently Andy and you, Todd. Is that something that you both would want to add to the outreach committee? Does that seem like a good direction to go in? Great. Okay. All right. Was I supposed to make any proposals there that we were supposed to vote on? I don't think that was any decisions made that needed any votes or anything. Okay, great. Are there any comments or final comments or other thoughts on this subject? All right. Thanks. And thank you so much, Scott. I feel like I ended that kind of abruptly and I didn't mean to. All right. So I'm curious, Maddie, I know that this is your first meeting. Do you have any questions at this point, or any questions about what we were just talking about? What's a greenhouse gas? What's the action plan? Are there any things that you would like for us to go over this evening while we're here and while Scott's here? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but just in case you wanted to ask.
I have no questions right now. I understood everything that you guys said. If I have any other questions in the future, I will come to you guys and say it, but I have nothing right now.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any announcements which are not on the agenda? Okay. All right, well then I'm going to move to adjourn. Excellent, all in favor of adjournment? Aye. All right, thanks everybody.